as the leader of a British institution almost that employs more than 80,000 people, and the futures of many of whom are at stake as we're looking at all that's going on, when you see the fiscal and the political roller coaster of the last few weeks, what are you thinking and what does this mean for your business?
Oh, that's a big question. And some of you will know, in my previous life, I used to be in charge of the public finances at the Treasury, so it's been a very sort of peculiar few weeks. I guess a few things to say. So I left the public sector and joined the partnership in January 2020, which you may think has either been the best timing or the most inauspicious timing. So I had sort of 5 or 6 weeks in the business before COVID hit, and now a cost of living crisis, which for us is probably having a more profound impact even than COVID. And that's for a number of reasons. As I say, we're partnerships. We're a very unusual business. We employ more people than most of our competitors. Our pay and benefits package is greater than our competitors. So when margins start to decline, it hits us harder. Obviously, the last few weeks have been. I think that the term unprecedented has been. You sort of think it's overused, but I think it's unprecedented. And I think as a business, what you most want is stability and predictability as you plan for the year ahead and you plan your investments for the next 2 to 3 years. And I think certainly the statement yesterday starts to lay, I think, probably firmer foundations for more stability than perhaps the last few weeks have entertained.
I mean, given the government as an agent of bringing about equality, you refer to your time at the Treasury. When you see all that's happening, are you tempted to go back?
Oh my goodness, no. I'm not sure they'd have me back either. I sort of often describe myself as being, I'm a realistic optimist. I'm an optimist because I believe profoundly in the good of people and the good of society and the good of business, which is just a collection of people. But I'm also very realistic because the context in which we find ourselves, I mean, most people in the room are far too young, but this sort of takes me back to the 1970s and some of the implications of the oil price shock. We haven't had a sort of inflation-led recession for decades. So I'm optimistic that we will move through. I'm optimistic that the British people are basically sort of pragmatic realists who want good, decent public services and want efficiency and value for money in how they the money they give to the government for tax and the money they trust to the government to spend on their behalf. So I'm very optimistic, and how long it takes us to sort of get back into that place where there's less volatility, more certainty. I think, as I say, I think the last couple of days have been an important step in the right direction.
And speaking of money, how do you balance paying and treating your workers well, better than many in the industry, arguably, with the competition from the Aldis, Lidls, Tesco's of the world? And when you're saying we're not focused on bottom line, but now consumers, all the latest data is showing that they are focusing on bottom line and they are pulling back on, say, the slightly luxury purchases. How do you balance that?
So it's a great question, and we revamped the purpose of the partnership this year, which is now working in partnership for a happier world, balancing happier people, customers, our employees, partners, suppliers, happier business, i.e. the bottom line, and happier world, i.e. all the good stuff we want to do in society. And those are incredibly difficult trade-offs, and they are difficult trade-offs when you're making money, and they are even more difficult trade-offs at the moment when profits are very challenged. And I guess the way I would describe it is that we still need to make a profit because we're to do the things that we need to do to survive as a business. And I think what it means is that it's not that we shy away from some of these difficult decisions. We closed a third of our John Lewis stores, permanently closed a third of our John Lewis stores during COVID. Very regretfully, we've had to make a lot of redundancies over the last 2 or 3 years. But I think the way one does that, the conversations and the engagement we have, and we're also democracy, so we have elected councillors and representatives, so it's a very engaging discussion. And what paradoxically often happens in the partnership, because you're both an owner and an employee, often our partners are saying, well, Sharon, why aren't you going faster? Gosh, because we know the pound in our pocket's going less far. Actually, we should be making change even more quickly. So I'm not sanguine about it, because I think we will, over the next, 6 to 12 months, be facing into yet more difficult challenges, because inflation is clearly with us for some time yet. So I would say it's as much the way we try to do the change as it is the fact of being absolved or somehow insulated from the realities of the market.
And you're open to the idea that there could be more stores to go and there could be more of all of that coming as customers tighten their belts, I'm guessing.
I guess all I would say is that, the next year looks tricky. I suspect that, I don't know how many of you fixed your mortgages at 2% on a 2-year fix during the pandemic when stamp duty was energy. So, there's nobody. One's particularly focused on, as we are, people from care and people who are most vulnerable in society. But, you'd have to be a millionaire not to worry about an energy bill that's going to double, or, your food inflation's running at more than 12%, or your mortgage going up potentially £4,000. I'm very well paid, and I've told my kids we're not switching on the heating this year. So they put an extra jumper on, and we've now got blankets on all the sofas. And my younger son said, but Mummy, why have we not put the heating on? I said, well, cost has gone up double. Oh, I really get it, I'll put another sweater on. So I think it means that context means, I don't think any business can say, they're not going to have to face into some difficult decisions.
And you had months earlier spoken of the need for the government to come up with a cost of living aid package for families that are struggling with some of these very costs.
Yes.
How are those discussions going now, and what are you calling for the government to do? Because one would argue that now it's even more imperative.
Yeah, so this was in July when the Ofgem had announced the energy cap for October, which looked like at that stage it was going to be about £4,000. And I think partly with my old hat on being in government, I was just profoundly worried about the lack of decisive action on energy bills, given everything we've talked about, that everybody's affected. And actually, this was when, it's hard to believe, this is 3 chancellors ago, so this was still Rishi Sunak in July. And actually, I think it was very positive that the government responded. They also responded with their version of a windfall tax, which I think was called the energy levy. Obviously now we're in a slightly different position. So the government, this Prime Minister, Chancellor but one.
This new Chancellor
has announced 6-month energy cap, which runs to April, and more targeted support from then. And I can understand it's the balance between ensuring that the financial markets don't feel that government borrowing is excessive, and that there's a robust fiscal plan, but also with how we as a country ensure that people least able to pay get the support they need.
He also announced and did away with some of the tax breaks for retailers, right? There was all this talk about VAT relief. Does that make it even harder? And now are you entering a phase where you're saying, well, there's no way we can pay our workers a bonus this year?
I think there's always the sort of balance as a business, as a retailer, with, I guess, where the original fiscal package, the mini budget was, is if you look at the tax changes that affect business, and it was corporation tax as well as the reintroduction of duty-free shopping. If you balance that against the rise in interest rates that were the consequence of the mini budget, the rise in business rate and the rise in interest rates has a bigger impact on investment decisions than the reduction in taxation. So actually what's more important to us is less whether individual taxes go up or go down. It's whether the general environment for business is stable, less volatile, and less spiky in terms of interest rates, where you suddenly think you're going to invest in, I'm going to make this up, a store, and to borrow to do so, and suddenly it's uneconomic overnight because the rate at which you're borrowing is so much more expensive.
And one of the things that you have spoken about is also the need to encourage more workers to come back into the workforce, right? Especially the 1 million, mostly over 50s, that have left. How do you think the government and companies can do that? Because, of course, there's an impact there on wage inflation as well.
Yeah, I mean, one of the, this is a positive really from the pandemic, but I don't know how many of us, I don't know, just over a year ago, gosh, it's when furlough was ended, would have guessed that the impact was really, really tight unemployment rather than too many people chasing too few jobs. So furlough ended, and what's been fascinating is, and I'm sure you know, that 1 million people have stopped looking for work. Some people call it the great sort of resignation. I think it's the great life reappraisal, where I think lots of people have just decided that, other things that they want to do in their lives, and or more negatively because of ill health. So the labour market is much tighter. So regardless of anything else, there's just much more wage inflation. You've got more jobs than people. And so whether this is about what companies can do, and the partnership has always had quite flexible retirement, so you can retire at 65 and come back and maybe work a couple of days, 3 days a week. I think it's really about being conscious of there'll be some older workers who still want to have their hands in work, and I talk as somebody who's, I'm 55 myself, but actually different businesses don't necessarily make it very easy to work in a very flexible way.
One of the issues around workers is, do we get more immigrants in? Your parents, I understand, came to the UK as immigrants in the 1950s. Do you think the country today is more or less open to immigrants than it was when they came here?
Oh my gosh, yes.
And, what would you like to see on that front? And I say this, I'm an immigrant, you're a child of immigrants.
Where's your heritage?
India.
So my parents are Windrush generation. My mother came to the UK when she was 19, which makes me go, ouch, in 1961, and my dad came when he was about 26 or so in 1957, 58, and they met here. And I often say to my mum's now passed on, but my parents, the best thing they ever did for their children was to leave Jamaica, because we got to go to school. My mum didn't really go to school very in any consistent way. She gave up going to school when she was about 11, and maybe had 2 or 3 years of schooling in total. My dad left school when he was 15. So the very fact that I was able to go to school until I was 18, my brother similarly, was a profound miracle as compared to my parents' background. So I think immigration personally had a profound effect, and I think it promotes tolerance and cultural exchange and diversity and inclusion, as well as being important for the skills gaps and where the labour market is today.